Okay,
I'm gonna make
We
my
are.
so I'll
my
tell,
dad- I'm just gonna
People
call my
will
dad.
be coming in right now.
oh, wow,
Oh, look at all these people. Woo!
lots of people.
Woo!
And same deal. I'll let people in as they populate.
That's
Okay,
great.
so welcome to our Thursday talk with Peter Francesco. And you've got two moderators tonight. Kathy and I are sharing the task. That's because Peter is a very important person, so we just didn't want to screw this up. I want to tell everybody that we are recording already as of now. And let me tell you just a little bit about Peter. Everybody in Holderness and most everybody in Ashland knows Peter because he's been here forever. He's a local boy. He'll tell you about that. He went to local schools. In his youth, he told me a little bit about himself and some things I didn't know. He has been over the years a very, very proficient skier, teaching ski school, working in ski patrol out in Colorado. Who knew? Teaching skiing at Waterville Valley. And he's also been very active on many, many boards, the school board, Ashland firefighter. He's been select board and this board and I don't know, lots of boards. He's a very, very active civil servant. But he also does real estate, and he happens to be my next door neighbor. And I couldn't have picked a better neighbor for the past 20 years. So all of that is lovely. Peter has an amazing collection of vintage postcards, many of which pertain to our area here. He will show us some of these today as part of his speech, and I can't wait to have him talk about them. So Peter, you're on.
Betsy, thank you. Kathy, thank you. And Adam, thanks for the help here. And Adam, at some point during this, I'm going to ask you to share with the public the site of the libraries where all of my postcards are. They are some 200 or 250 strong. I focused only on Squam Lake and Holderness.
I will share that link in the chat.
Okay, thank you. So let me get started here. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth. You'll see me looking back and forth because I'm new with this tech stuff. First of all, how did we get here? How did and I will pronounce it Francesco, which now we are able to say in central New Hampshire, which my grandmother and grandfather were not able to say. They had to say Francesco for two reasons. Number one, when my grandmother was naturalized, she would have nothing to do with Italian. Therefore, she Americanized Francesco to Francesco. And if she pronounced it Francesco in those times, it got spelled with a CH. Today, the world has become more educated. The confusion occasionally for the name Francisco was she had a sign painted for the front of their store. And I will share a picture of the store with you right now. I'm going to skip a little bit. But the store, how do I, oh, right here, there. All the way to the end, she says, okay. I'll be talking about these in a moment. But anyway, here is the store. This sign, and I'm moving the mouse back and forth across it. This sign at one time said M.A., which was my grandmother, Mary, M.A. Francisco Variety Store, because she contracted a man to paint the sign, and he spelled it Francisco. Well, she was rather stubborn, and money was always an issue. So she refused to pay him, but she hung the sign out there anyway. And therefore, we are known as the Francisco family, or had for many, many years. So let's for a moment. Now, I'm going to back up to, again, how did the Francesco family wind up in Holderness? My grandfather, my father's father, was born in 1882 in Italy. He was left on the doorstep of one of the Franciscan monasteries. They named him Frank. They chose the name Francesco out of thin air. There is all we know, and now you know, of my heritage. Other than in the late 1800s, a gentleman by the name of Raphael Pacetti. Many of you recall the Pacetti's hardware store in Ashland. That was Al Pacetti's, and Raphael Pacetti was his dad. Raphael gave money to the Catholic Church and said, "Send me a boy." And that was my grandfather that was chosen, probably volunteered. And in his teens came over to this country, went to work for the Pacetti's as an indentured servant and had to work a certain number of years to pay room and board and passage before he was free to move about. And as he moved about, he did wind up buying a store in Holderness. And I will see if I can share that with you. Not yet. Okay. He then, as the Italians at the time said, when it was time to take a wife, and those are the words that I've always heard, when it was time to take a wife, he got on the train in Ashland, he took it to the north end of Boston, and he found my grandmother. And as we know, there are one or two Italians in the north end of Boston. They got married, he came back, they had my father, and my father was born, and I'm gonna go back to that same picture. I'm gonna leave that up for a moment, if you don't mind. Oh yeah, here. I just got a point here. Share that. Well, you know, I'm gonna leave this one up for a moment and talk about the store. I don't know if you can see the mouse, but I'm moving the mouse around the store right now. That was before it had a second story added to it. My father was born upstairs in that second story in 1919. Therefore, this photograph is obviously older than 1919, but I leave this one up because there are a lot of really neat things in it. The four young ladies you see here, there are three more of them here. There are several crossing the bridge here. They're all in the same uniform, and they were campers at Camp I-Lee, I-L-E-E. Camp I-Lee later on became what we knew as Camp Wachusett, the girls' camp, across from Little Squam. Now you can see the library here. I'm moving the mouse around the library. That was there then. This building over here with the car in front of it is a gas station. And that was Gay's Garage, G-A-Y, Gay's Garage. And then this building that I'm circling now with the mouse was my grandparents' original bowling alley. I don't think they owned it. They leased it, they rented it, but it was a bowling alley. And then as I said, my father was born here. Across the bridge where I'm moving the mouse now is what became or was Fred Perkins' Squam Boat Livery. Now, if you look at the top of the hill, this very large building at the top of the hill, that was the Asquam Hotel. And I've got some photographs of that I'll show you. So I will get rid of now and go back to indentured servant, teens, Ashland. He bought the store in 1925. Frank passed away when my father was 6 years old. It left my grandmother running the store on her own, and she did her best, but she did have petit mal epilepsy, and from time to time, she would get a little excited, a little stressful, and she would just check out. So she needed help. And during the summer months when the store was open, the Italians, one or two Italians would come up from the north end of Boston, move in with her and live in the store to help her run it. It was closed during the winter months. And then my Uncle John, Big John, as we sometimes called him, the locals mostly called him Johnny Fat. And I'm going to see if I can call up a photo of Johnny Fat. Share here. Share here. Nope,
Still
nope,
sure.
nope.
Just click one.
Click there. There he is. There's Big John. Big John was at 5'3" and at one time did weigh over 300 pounds. Now in the background, I don't know if you can see my mouth, but there's a lady standing there talking to a gentleman that's taller than she is. The gentleman is Neil McDonald. He was one of the three McDonalds that worked at Squam Boats Marina. Neil was the outboard mechanic. Brother David was inboard mechanic. Brother Alan was the manager. The lady he's speaking with is my grandmother. That's Mary, of the M.A. Francesco fame. Moving back over to, in 1956, or 7. My father even had forgotten when I spoke with him. He built the bowling alley next door to the store. And it's very difficult to picture as you stand and you look at Walter's Basin, which was the bowling alley. It's very difficult to picture that there was a store to the left of it. There was, and that's where he was born. I was about 7 years old and carried the nails. The carpenters gave me a job to get out of their way. But to digress a moment, my Uncle John, who raised him, helped him out financially. And at one point, John came over to the construction project and said, Louis, come down to the beach with me. And they walked down to the beach, and John put a roll of $50 in my father's hand. They were all rolled up. At that time, you could put 40 halves in a roll, so it was $20, which was a lot of money in 1956 and 7. And he said, Louis, I want you to take this roll of $50 and throw them right out there in the middle of Little Squam, just as far as you can. And Dad said, John, why would you have me do something like that? And John said, so when you're done with this project, I'll know where $20 of my money went. Now, moving back to a little bit of history of the road and the main street. The main street, as we see it today, has not changed a lot. It has changed some, but the road itself, Route 3, was originally a part of College Road. And College Road was constructed by Governor Benning Wentworth from the town of Wolfboro, New Hampshire, to the town of Dartmouth, New Hampshire, Hanover, New Hampshire. So Governor Wentworth could attend to the commencement exercises. So the power of the governor at that time, he had the road built so he could move from his summer home for the commencement exercises. We still do call a piece of it College Road in town. If you leave from what is now the Golden Pond Country Store, the gas station, excuse me, and go up the hill, you're on Shepherd Hill. If you continue straight down the backside, that is College Road. And then I think we all know that if you continue a little further up Route 3, you can come to College Road in Center Harbor, which takes you over to 25B. There are sections of College Road, as I said, all the way from Wolfboro to Hanover. Route 3, as we know it, was not as we know it today. If you went again from the store to up Shepherd Hill, down College Road, that was Route 3. There was no Route 3 from the base of College Road to the base of Shepherd Hill Road. It did come down to the main street of Holderness and continued on until we get to the Boulders Motel. And we all now pass the Boulders with that big ledge on our left. Route 3 used to go between the motel and the ledge. So we used to pass with the ledge on our right. Then as we continue toward Ashland, if you were leaving the lower parking lot of the town office, you can look across the street and see where Route 175 used to come out. Now, if we did not take Route 175 and we continued on toward Ashland, when we got to River Street, which is where the covered bridge is, that was Route 3. Route 3 did not exist from the covered bridge all the way to what we now know as the Dairy Joy. I believe it was around 1957 that that road was built through there. And incidentally, if any of you are paying attention and disagree with me, that's fine. Because, you know, I know this from other people's memories. I don't recall 1957. I was 6 years old and I was not thinking about roads and buildings. I also believe that at one time, if you took Route 175, it could go all the way to Plymouth, but there also was a road that went over Seven Pines Road or up Perch Pond Road, then to what we now call Norman Smith Road. Once you got to Norman Smith Road, you were on Mount Prospect Road. And once on Mount Prospect Road, you then traveled over to Huckins Hill Road. Huckins Hill Road is presently a Class 6 highway that takes you down to Route 175, and you would then go across the Livermore Bridge, which is, I think we call it the Pumpkin Seed Bridge now, mostly in disarray. And that would put you on Route 175, either to go left to Plymouth or right to Campton. That time there may or may not have been the bridge that we know exists today to get to Plymouth on Route 175A, there was a ford going across the river at some time in that history. So backing up again now to roads and highways. The old highway, which we know as the old highway, left Route 113 going into or up the mountain at what used to be Charlie Howe's gravel pit. It's across from Laurel Road now, I think it is. The old highway, many of us have walked it and hiked it. It's a great walk. It's still very viable, still in good shape. When you leave now Route 113 to go up the old highway, the first section going up toward Mount Livermore, up toward the, I'll remember the name of the cemetery, but that's kind of rough. That got washed out in the major flood of 1972. The old highway was the major road from Holderness to Sandwich. There are pieces of it that still go through the True Farm. It goes through the Burley Farm. Parts of it are town roads still left over at Burley and True Farms. Came back down to Route 113 as you exit True Farm. But then as you get down more toward Thompson Road, there's a piece of it that went back up and through there. The state of New Hampshire gave that over to the town of Holderness. And again, Class 6 highway. And I will use, many of you recall our long-term Lyle Thompson as road agent. When anybody asked him about it being public, Lyle would say, yeah, it ain't been throwed up. And he would say the same thing. We have Mountain Road, which goes from the old highway at Bradley Field and the Webster property over the mountain down to Perch Pond Road. It also got washed out in 1972 in the major flood. You get down, when you go up, if you look and you think, how did they ever get horse-drawn or oxen-drawn wagons up this hill? And even more on the backside, how did they ever stop the wagons from pushing the animals down the hill? It's very, very steep, quite impressive. But that's how we do get up to Mount Livermore at this point, and up to the trail that, Betsy, what's the name of the trail? Not Chamberlain. I'll think of it. Anyway, it leads to all the mountains. It leads over to Mount Webster that goes to Percival. Okay, nevertheless.
Crawford Ridgepole Trail.
There you go. Thank you. So now we have back to the bowling alley. In those times, and I say those times, the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, we as a society used to slow down a little bit, and we'd stop and actually sit down for lunch. Today, we do it in our car. You just throw the lunch bag over the back seat to the kids. The people that would come in made the town of Holderness. They were wonderful. I'll start with Kathy, your grandfather, Sid Lovett Sr. He would come in, he's a very, very kind gentleman. And he would come in, also a dog lover. He had a black lab. I had a black lab named Maynard. And your grandfather quite often would buy a hot dog from my father to feed to my dog. But it was the social gathering. To just digress a little bit about the dog, he used to pick up the mail. Everybody in town knew him. He used to ride on the bow of the boat. But the other, I had a whole list of people that the breakfast, the Kip and Ken Hawkins would come in every morning for their coffee. At the time, almost everyone smoked. So they would come in for their cup of coffee, they would light their cigarettes, and they would commiserate on anything that was taking place, had taken place, or was going to take place. There was one gentleman by the name of Dr. Leach, John Verner Leach. Doc Leach allowed himself one package of Pall Malls every day. When he came through the door, if he walked right over to the cash register and said, "I'd like my cigarettes," it meant he had run out a little early the night before. Otherwise, he would go to the counter, he would sit down, he would ask for his cup of coffee and plain donut, and then he would have a cigarette. Kip, I always say that Kip, and I brought this up the other day, again, Kip Hawkins, our long-term fire chief, was opened the Manchester Union Leader every morning. The first thing he did was went right to the obituaries. And I asked him one time why, and he said, I just have to check and see if I'm in there. So some of the local youth that frequented the bowling alley because we did have the pinball machines. We had Brian Baker, Eric Nielsen, John Nielsen, Duke Kimball. I've forgotten where I put the rest of those names, but anyway, if I've missed you, I apologize. I mentioned a couple of times we had quite a flood in 1972, 73, 4th of July weekend. I forget whether we had 7 inches of rain in 8 hours or 8 inches of rain in 7 hours, but nevertheless, it devastated the lake. The docks at Church Island were all floating 3 or 4 feet above. The showroom at Squamboats Marina was thigh deep in water. The National Guard in the middle of the night showed up and went and sandbagged the Ashland Dam so it would not wash out. Because there was so much water at the time coming down Owl Brook headed toward the dam, once it was sandbagged, the water backed up. The Ashland Channel was running backwards. The Squam Channel was running backwards. And then when the water receded and they were able to open up the dam a little bit and get rid of it, the water flowed through so fast, canoeists, kayakers could not go through the bridges. It was just too much of a current. Boats would have to go at 1/2 and 3/4 throttle to just maintain steerage to get under the bridges. It washed out many docks and took out a big piece of L.W. Packard's dye house, the woolen mill. What else? In the lunch people, the flood. Oh, at the time, it also took out the bridge at the end of Perkins Lane Road. Perkins Lane Road at the time was called Camp I. Lee Road. I've mentioned the ladies of Camp I. Lee earlier. And it washed out the bridge. In those days, there was another camp. There were several camps, many. Somebody ought to do a history of camps around Squam sometime, but there was also Camp Squamacy that you accessed via that road. That was the end of the road at Camp Squamacy. And 2 gentlemen by the name of Peter and Lester were hired to rebuild the bridge. It took them most of one summer. It took them so many hours and the bill so large that it was Charlie Pringle and Mike Plantamura that owned Camp Squamacy that got together all the owners to pay for it. And the pay was so outrageous. It was so high that they bought a granite monument and renamed it the Peter Lester Bridge. Now, I don't know if the monument's still there, but I meant to go down and take a look. So, see what else I've got here. Oh, I'm working just about out of time, I think. Am I not? Somebody nod their head.
Well, Peter, you've tantalized us with all those postcards that you flipped through trying to show something. And
Okay.
Please don't leave us in suspense all night.
All right, we're going to get back to them. We'll get back to them right now. Here's the share. This is, as I told you, this is my Uncle John that raised, I want to get back here. That's the first one. Then Uncle John that raised my father with his sister. I wanted to show this one to you again as well, because this old car that I'm wiggling the mouse on is sitting right on Squam Bridge. And then over here, you can see a sign that does say Camp I. Lee. Well, maybe you can't see it. Mine is large enough I can see it. And here is the store right behind or next to these other 2 cars that my father was born in. And then this large building was Avid Long. I say it Avid. It was not spelled like Harvard because it was A-V-A-R-D. Avid Long's garage. That's what was torn down where my father did build the bowling alley. Next here we have, oh, I love this old photograph. Most of you can recognize this. It was called the Central House in this era. If you look at the dress and the ladies and the horses and even the bicycles, the bicycle, I mean, I don't know how this little lad even got on that bicycle. The bike's so big. This is now what we know as the Science Center's building. It became the Holderness Inn when, let's see, Guy Davidson's wife owned and ran the inn. Ruby Davison, that was her name, Davison, ran the inn. And she and my uncle had a little bit of a competition because of the slot machines. She had slot machines in her inn, and he had slot machines in the back of his store. And they competed to see who they could get the guys to play, put the most nickels in them. This and the land that now the Science Center sits on was purchased, I believe, by Frank Webster, late 50s, early 60s, and given over then to the Science Center. Our first director was Gib Merrill, and it has morphed into what it is today. And since I've mentioned Frank, I've got to mention also the amount of good that the Webster family has done throughout the town of Holderness since the early 1900s. And I'll start with, first of all, Church Island was a Webster Holdings. Frank and family were involved in the beginning of the Squam Lakes Association, the beginning of the Squam Lakes Conservation Society, all of the conservation that's been taking place and still lives on today. And the Webster family having put so many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres into current use and into, I'm looking for the word, Betsy. Anyway.
Conservation.
Conservation easement,
Yeah.
which means it will never, in perpetuity, never be developed. Now here we have, this is the Asquam Hotel that I showed you earlier in a photograph. Oh, sorry. The Asquam Hotel. There were signs all over the town that some still survive that say the Asquam Hotel, views unsurpassed. And this was right at the very top of Shepherd Hill. And if you got the lakeside window, you looked out over all of Big Squam Lake. I don't know if you could have seen at the time any of Little Squam Lake, but probably because there are so many fields. Now the next one here, I'm going to go over to. This was called the Towers, also known as the Livermore Hotel. This was the competitor. Oh, I'm going to back up and speak just briefly again about the Asquam Hotel. The Asquam Hotel was owned and operated by the Smith family. And as my father said, and who knows where he gets some of this stuff, but in 1950, Mrs. George Smith was paying her taxes to the tax collector then, Bernice Shields. And she said to Bernice, if you put my taxes up one more dime, I'm tearing the place down. In 1951, down it came. So then we go over to the Livermore Hotel. This was a very large, also, we now have the Livermore Beach, the Livermore Bathing Beach, which was the beach for the hotel. This hotel burned in the 20s sometime. I don't know exactly when. Again, it was purchased by the land, the wreckage by the Webster family, who then donated to the beach to the town of Holderness. And we still use the beach at their pleasure, with the stipulation that it be used as a bathing beach only. And if the town of Holderness were to choose to do something else with it, it would revert back to the Webster family. It is not available for anyone but residents and taxpayers. If you have a guest or friend staying at your house, you cannot merely invite them to go use the beach. If we did that, we'd have to give it back to the Webster family. Here is a view of the town from Little Squam. You can see the bridge here. I'm moving the mouse over the bridge. This is the store before the second story was put on it that my father was born in. This big old boathouse has been gone for many, many years. This little building got picked up and moved up toward the bridge. It was always called the Love Nest. Why? I don't know. And then again, back to the store with the second story. I believe this is Billy Pierpont, and J.O. White could probably confirm that, which I will get this to J.O. I saw this photograph for the first time today. But this is when the Mattatuck Band was in town for a bicentennial. So there we have all I've got with the with the screens, and that pretty much the last thing I did want to finish up with was just how I personally feel about our town of Holderness. And I think we have the nicest town in the state. And I want to thank all of the volunteers, of which we have 80 plus volunteers that help us with the town. Those are all unpaid. They are on the planning board, the zoning board, the rec board. Betsy, you're on the library trustees, also volunteers. So many of them. I see Barbara Fahey's here. She was also on a committee that worked on our master plan. And just thanks to everyone that makes Holderness Holderness. And we are so fortunate to be here and to have the town that we've got. And it is made up of all of the people, and the people are very special. Thank you all so much. Now, if you have questions, I will give you an answer if possible. There's a lot I don't know, so fire away.
So, Peter, while people are either unmuting or typing in their questions or whatever, let me just offer a very quick clarification on the town beach. And when I served on the Squam Lake Conservation Society board, they impressed upon me, and I was impressed, that the very first conservation property that they received was from Frank Webster, and it was the 8 acres of the town beach. It came with the caveat that it must be made available in perpetuity as a beach for the residents of Holderness. And so actually the Conservation Society owns it. It won't go back to the Websters, but perhaps if somebody stops allowing people to swim there who are residents of Holderness, then maybe the Websters, then they could say, you've broken the trust, the conservation agreement, and therefore we're taking our land back. But assuming it stays as a town beach, then we've got use of it forever. I see we do have questions. Comments and questions.
I have a question for Peter. Rich Weymouth.
Hi, Rich.
How you doing? Unless you already talked about it, your father's mechanical interest in the steam engines. Did you already talk about that?
No, I'm sorry. I thought I ran out of time. I didn't quite get that far, but just a brief bit on my father and the steamboat. My father was not a terribly mechanically inclined person. He ran the lunch counter, he cooked, he did a good job there. He could unjam a bowling ball from a bowling machine. He could set pins. As he grew into his 60s, when I grew up, I never ever recalled my father being out on Squam Lake. Not a sailboat, not a canoe, not a powerboat, nothing. And then in around 1975 or 76, he found that steamboat in Pennacook, New Hampshire, and it was just nothing but a hulk with a double-ended boat. He wasn't even looking for that. He chased another boat down there and bought it, but it turned out to be a very solid hull. He built the canopy that you see on it. He was a good woodworker. He loved to build. And from there, he got an interest in steam, and he bought some pipes, and he got some help and learned how to bend pipes, and he learned how to put pipes together. And then he learned how to fire a boiler, and there was a lot to it.
Yes.
It had to be just the right amount of wood, the right amount of steam, the right amount of temperature, and it could be very dangerous. And he had two constant steamboat buddies, and one was James Cripps, the other was Kent Smith. He also had a man in Cotton Cove very skilled with metalworking, Ken Bailey. And the four of them were out on that boat hour after hour after hour. And if you were sitting on your dock and there were a few children around and they happened to be going by, they would nudge in with a steamboat and say, anybody want to go for a ride? And everybody would pile on. And, oh, look, here's, I don't know. You see that?
That's great.
That's a great picture.
Yep, that's him in the steamboat. Yep. And it became a dedication when he sold the bowling alley to the Dussault family in 1980. That was his constant love. He built a boat shed on Shepherd Hill on Bo Perkins' land. He gave Bo a few dollars every year for taxes on the building, never owned the land, still doesn't. When Bo passed away, Bo's son Rick said, Louis, don't worry about the steamboat and a place to keep it and the land up there. You keep your boat shed right there. And then Rick passed away and his widow said the same thing. So, and the building still stands there. There's still some things in it, but the Perkins family also very, very good to Dad.
That's nice. That's nice.
Thank you. That's great. Great to hear about that.
Okay.
Peter, I've got a question for you. Who's got your dad's steamboat now?
That was sold to a man in Vermont. Now, when Dad passed away, which was, I think, 2015, was that it? Oh, 2013. I didn't know how to run a boat. And I discussed it with my family. Did we want the steamboat? And the answer turned to be the same way that I felt, and that was on a hot August day, I didn't want to build a wood fire in front of me to go tooting around the lake. I like to jump in the boat and push the button and go. And that's what we do each evening, almost every evening. Yeah.
Yep, I miss him because I remember your dad brought in other friends with steamboats, and sometimes we'd have a steamboat convention in Bennett Cove.
Yes, and Betsy, I should mention that the week after Labor Day, every year, there are about 50 or 60 steamboats that get together for a meet at Lee's Mills in Moultonboro. And Lee's Mills is down near Loon Center. Well worth taking the time to go see these folks. And I always picked on my dad that he loved steam because I said, yeah, you're a Depression kid. You just don't want to buy any fuel. It's free, it's wood.
Peter,
Anything else?
I have
Yes.
what do you miss most about the bowling alley, the restaurant? What was your favorite activity there? I loved it as a kid and teenager in the summer. So I'm curious how much you might miss.
That's easy. It's the people.
Yeah.
It's the people, because it was, as I said, everybody slowed down and took a break. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have computers. We didn't have any way to share things that were going on in our lives. So you did it at the bowling alley. whether you wanted anything to come out or not, it came out while you were there. And it was, the people were so good and so kind. And that's where everyone picked on everyone else, but with love. So it's the people I miss most.
Yeah. Oops, I just lost him.
Did you?
I'm surprised there aren't other questions for Peter. I guess the one question I have is, tell us about your postcard collection. How did you get interested in that?
That's a good one too. The bridge that I remember growing up at and standing on and jumping off of, which I wasn't supposed to, was built in 1938. In 1972, 3 or 4, it was deemed that was one of the most dangerous places in Route 3 in the entire state of New Hampshire because it was so narrow. There were no dedicated sidewalks. We lost a dog or two. Fortunately, we never lost any people. So the state of New Hampshire decided to rebuild the bridge. And it was 1975 that the Byron and LeClaire Company got the contract to rebuild the bridge. And in about 1976, they had to drive some piling on our side of the channel. And they went to my father and said, we need to drive the piling next to your store. And we've looked at the foundation and don't think the store would survive. So we need to have your permission written to go in and shore it up and pour some concrete and put some reinforcement rod in so we don't knock it down when we drive the piling. My father said, well, how much is that going to cost you? And when they told him, he said, bring me the check, I'll take care of the store. So over one Thanksgiving in 1976, we went to work tearing down the store. I found a box of old postcards, and that began the collection. And then I started collecting. Whenever I went to an antique show or went to some place, there'd be a postcard for 25 cents or 50 cents. And it got to the time, the place that they became so expensive, they're almost $10. And you can buy them on eBay for $10 or $20, but then somebody wants $2 to send it to you. So I had my limit. I'll pay $10, but and I watched weekly, if not daily, everything that's posted on eBay, and I usually already have them. I pretty much have them already, and I'm happy to loan them out. Adam is going to share with you after this little chat the site that you can go to. Tom's step took many hours digitizing the postcards, and they're on the Holderness Free Library site to share with everyone. And I'm glad to see that they get shared.
So Peter, we have a comment from Steve and Ida Colchamiro, and they say, we bought our Candle Shores house in Ashland because we saw an index card for sale sign in the bowling alley.
Yeah, that's good. It's still today, so many people say to me, I used to work for your dad. And it was one of the best experiences I ever had. He was good. He was good to the local youth. He was good to anybody that came in the bowling alley as a customer, as an employee. And he was a fun person. And I truly miss him. And even today, after it's 7-8 years since he's gone, I still see something that I chuckle about and say, gosh, I got to go tell Dad about it. Well, we were lucky to have him.
Peter, since you have such a good memory for all this history stuff, I bet you can remember something special about 1971. Can you tell us if you had any involvement at all with On Golden Pond, the movie?
That was actually, Betsy, I think that was closer to 1979 and the beginnings of 1980.
Okay, well, see, this is why, you've got a better memory.
Well, the only memory I have, there were a couple that we did not get involved as the youth that rode in the boats to keep people away from the cameras. We were the worker bees. We had the jobs to support the families that had those young people that could have a boat to go, and they paid the 14-year-olds a great deal of money, what I thought was a great deal of money, wished I'd been in on it, to just keep the traffic and keep the public away from the filming as it went on. The best experience I had with it was when they filmed the site at the marina. That 3 minutes of film took about 8 hours. And we sat like pigeons up on the roof of the bowling alley and watched Henry Fonda across the street. We watched, we learned he couldn't drive a boat. He almost took out the gas pumps when they turned the wheel over to him one time. They brought some of the things the film company did. They didn't dare to let the people drive the boats after they'd seen that. So they put divers in the water and brought the boat in on cables, took it out on cables. If you watch that film again, it's Ethel that drove the boat. And again, she almost hits the boathouse on the way out. So many mechanical things they did. Now, I also have to mention L.W. Packard, my wife's family. Her father was then president of the L.W. Packard Mill. At one point, the film company was redoing a shot in late summer, and one of the directors looked and said, that rock wasn't there in the first shot. Where'd that rock come from? And they explained to him that the lake was going down. And he said, well, make it go back up. Well, the L.W. Packard Woolen Mill had water rights, and still the dam owners have water rights. So they had to approach Sue's dad and say, would you close your dam for a little while and let the lake fill up so we can finish our film? And he said, of course, but please give me my water back in October because we do make electricity with it. And they agreed. So everything was fine.
So Peter, another comment. Actually, I hope Adam will let you read all the comments. A lot of them are just thanking you and appreciating your talk tonight. But there's one here that maybe means more to you than it does to me. The Beckman and Winslows went up to the bowl, capital B, bowl, B-O-W-L, the day after Christmas one year. This was one of my best Christmas memories. We laughed so hard.
That is so, so kind. We just lost Gloria Winslow a few months ago. Her daughter, Holly Beckman, was one of my classmates. We try to get together on occasion at class reunions. She was my 8th grade prom date, and a good, still a very good friend, and so nice to hear from them. Thank you. That is a good memory.
All right, get it in. Okay.
Hey, Peter, I have a question for you. Rich Weymouth again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do you remember Dick Seary and the mailboat? Do you have any memories about the mailboat?
I have, yes, good, excellent memories about the mailboat. The mailboat.
It was Billy.
It was
Billy Seary. It's Andy Eaton.
It sounds like Andy.
It was Billy Seary, not Dickie.
His brother was Dick, but yeah.
It was Billy.
I only ever saw the mailboat.
Andy dated all of them. She knows.
Well, I have to give Andy credit. I have to give Andy credit. The first photograph that I showed you that I said it was the first time I'd seen it was today. That was the photograph she took of the Mattatuck band and the store in the background. That was a great photo. Thank you, Andy. But the series were from Marlboro Bay. Was that it? Maybe down that neck of the woods.
Well, they started out next to Barbara Hendrick on Casumpe Point in the Garrochet's house. And then they moved down to High Heath.
Okay. Now,
that was my first stop.
he was the most comfortable mail person I'd ever seen. He would go with the old beat up box with the pigeonholes in it that was locked, always had to be locked, over to Dick Piper, who was the post office in Holderness for many, many years. Dick Piper would help him load the mailbox and relock it to put on the hand truck to cross the street to the boat livery. Very serious about this lock, you know. And they would put it in the boat and then they would unlock it. And Dick would jump down in that boat. He would lay out across the back of the seat and put his feet up on the gunnel and drive that old outboard with the one hand behind. He'd tear out of there full speed down the channel. Nobody cared. They were getting their mail. And then from there, at one point, Duke Kimball ran the mailboat. And I got to digress here and tell one story about a lady who was getting a little confused. And we used to put the newspapers on the boat. And people would call us and tell us whether they wanted the Herald or the Globe. Duke arrived at the dock one day and passed the lady the Boston Globe, and she said, "No, I wanted the Boston Herald." The next day he came down and he said, "She wants the Herald." So I gave him the Herald. And the next day she took the Herald and she looked and she said, "I told you I wanted the Globe." And the following day he said, "Give me 2 papers." And he held the papers up, one in each hand. And he said, "Lady, pick one, and that's what you're going to get for the rest of the season."
Betsy, Tink would like to add a little bit about the curry place, if you don't mind.
I forgot to mention also Tink drove the mailboat too.
Yeah,
Tink did everything.
Fran, that would be fine. We've got about another 10 minutes in our hour here, so let's just keep it going.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
Are you hearing me?
yes.
Yes, Tink, yes.
Rob Haskell he's developed a history of the Curry place. There's quite a history there. Robert Patton Curry purchased it apparently in 1884. And there's a long story there, including the post office that we've just been talking about and all the other things that went on. So at some point we might want to expand a little bit and talk about it. Apparently he married Anne Sarah Rogers, and the long history that goes on there. I think it's something we might want to do because it is as much a part of Holderness as anything else is. And from my mailboat days, I can remember Dick Piper, who already been mentioned, going over there. And of course, originally when we started on the mailboat way back in the 50s when I did it, we went to the Ashland Railroad Station to pick up the mail. And we would pick it up. And by the way, I don't know where that big pigeonhole chest went, but when they tore down Smith Piper's store, what I call urban renewal, I went all through the ruins up there. I looked all over the place. You couldn't find any of the remains of the mailboat days, and apparently it got off somewhere else in somebody else's barn. I don't know where all that stuff is. We did find one cancellation, Asquam Lake RPO, dating back to whenever the 4-cent stamp was in vogue. And so we've got a copy of the impression. And the mailboat was its own post office. It wasn't an ancillary to Ashland. It wasn't an add-on to Holderness. It was its own post office by definition. So we might want to bring some of that in. But I think the Curry Place history is very interesting.
So Peter, I got a
Yes.
message that probably you'll see, but it's from Gail and Andy Turef. And they just wanted to thank you quietly for renting them their first rental on Squam at Camp Aloha on Mooney Point.
Oh,
And
my.
they are now actually living here full time. So you have, I'm sure through your rental business, you have introduced many, many fine people to the Lakes area. And, you know, I have to say thank you to you for letting us be your neighbor.
No, that's certainly a high point of our lives is having you there. You're just, it's wonderful. Now, to speak briefly about rentals and Camp Aloha. And I see Bill Judkins. I just happened to see Bill Judkins hold a note up. I can't read the note, but anyway, Bill was a guest at our place last year. I have a question. Oh, Bill has a question. But he worked at Kip and Joe's Marina for John Bourne in probably late 50s, early 60s. Bill, you can nod your head.
Well, you've covered my question. I worked for John Bourne from approximately 66 to 72. And I point out that's how I got to know the Lovett family, because Sid and Richard had the two crappiest wooden boats on Squam Lake. And they were in there every day having it serviced.
Yeah.
As a result, I got to know the entire Weymouth family, and particularly Peter, who I actually hung on a hoist because he was so annoying. But my question is, what can you tell us about the three marinas on the lake, Squam Boats, Boat Service, and Miners Marine in its day?
Well, that is true. And you've just nailed all of them. Fred Perkins built Squam Boats, and I did not touch at all on the fire. There was a tremendous fire there, 1968. But Fred Perkins built Squam Boats. I don't know when. He also built Perkins Cabins and had the mail service, had a workboat. He had the contract to paint and locate all the buoys. And if it was a windy day, Fred took artistic license and planted those buoys wherever he wanted. The second marina you've mentioned is Kip and Joe's Marina. And Kip and Joe's, and again, the 50s was a swamp. And I remember as a young man watching an old machine, it called a drag line, and the operator would swing a big clam-like bucket out into the swamp and then drag it in and dump it in a pile or dump it in a truck. And that was dredged out. And if you look at any of Squam charts prior to 1957, you will not see Kip and Joe's Marina on it. Then we had Alan Eady Miner, owned and operated the River Edge Marina in my day, in my recollection. They were the ones that built the house. I always called it the fishbowl. It's the house, the nice modern Florida looking house at the mouth of the channel. When I say the mouth, if you're coming in from Big Squam, it's on the right. Eventually sold it to Horace Wills. And it was curious that Horace Wills' stepson wound up buying and owning and operating the marina later on. But one of the interesting things to you folks that ever remember the Dean Martin show, Dean would walk over to a bookshelf and he would push on one side of the bookshelf and it would spin around into a bar. Al Miner was watching that show one night and he said, I want one of those. And he took a spindle from a truck and he put some bearings on it and he devised the same thing. So he had a bookshelf he could push on one corner and spin it around into a bar. I guess we've had
Any
it.
other comments, questions? I've got one other message saying that Gloria Winslow and Shirley Staples would summer at the Curry House and go for tea and swimming. Shirley is 96 and still alive with full memories and is someone who wants to know more about Curry House. So maybe we can put her in touch with Bob Haskell, who's writing that history, and maybe she can help him, in fact, or something.
Yeah, I think
So-
that's a great idea. My father, during the Depression, my father was, bounced around from house to house to house. Nobody had any extra money, of course. He was just another mouth to feed. And I don't know the name, but whoever owned the Curry place at that time, it was a tea house, kind of took him under their wing. And he stayed over there for a while. And they looked out for him while his mother was not well.
So any other questions? I think, Peter, you've done a wonderful job. You are Mr. Holderness, for sure.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That was
That was
fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Great
Well,
job.
Take care, all of you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Betsy.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, library.
Oh, my Missy. I see Gary in there. He didn't have much to say.
Hey,
And I
Adam,
have to
can you-
say thanks Angie for helping.
Yeah, thank you. Adam, can you keep us on for a moment? Okay. I don't know why I got that from my techie right here.
bring it up on the big screen. Hang on.